I know the agenda says one thing, but I just checked with John and I think we'll get started. Good evening and welcome to everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Frank Amoroso, as a few of you may know, and I was asked by John Thurlow, who labored long for this event, to, so to speak, pull the strings for the time we'll take this evening to honor a truly great lady, Patricia Kachmar. I tried to analyze why he asked me to do this, and I came up with some interesting observations. It wasn't because I held high political office, such as former leader Linwood Higgins, or Dan Warren, who served there also, and has authored many fine articles about Scarborough and the important people in its history. And it's certainly, I'm not formally educated as our esteemed Dr. Bill Richards, Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Charlie Lyons, who can't be here this evening from the University of Maine, nor is it because I hold a high administrative post, such as town manager, Carl Betterly. And certainly I did not know Pat as well as her mother, Dorothy Saburin, or her husband, Jack, or her children, Lisa, Luann, John, Nancy, and James. I'm not now, or ever have been, a member of the Fourth Estate or Allied Media Service. I did not serve as long with her on the school board as Jackie Perry or Shirley Hughes. I do not presently represent the town council or as its chair, Bill Kennedy, or the school board and its chair, Deborah Jackson. I never held a position in either the Scarborough or the Portland Teachers Education Association, and I was not selected as former Scarborough's postmaster and neighbor Jerry Parody. I do not now represent the Scarborough Public Library as Sandra Hartford and Sue Winch, who are asked to be here, nor that I serve as Gary Lafano did on the council for as long. Those who remember my service would say I must have been a great deal further away from our father than the Reverend Stephen Concannon. Some would be so unkind as to suggest that I belonged in the other hotspot. But no matter, it must not have been for the reasons enumerated that I was asked to make an offer that we can't refuse. No, it's not my heritage. But it must have been because John felt he should respect his elders and assumed, since I retired from my position last week, it was because that I must have been the oldest and therefore should be the logical choice for this honor and privilege. And it is an honor and privilege to play a small part in honoring such a fine lady who played such an important role in and for her family, her dear friends, and they are many, her community, her profession, the field of education, both public and post-secondary, for which she brought and received honors at home and abroad. Her vital role in her church, and of course her love and care for her students and her many years of public service. John asked if I had an anecdote, a memory, something that I could relate to with Pat, and I was fortunate enough to serve with her. But I remember one evening after I had just moved to my new home on Maple Avenue, and the doorbell rang and I went to the door, and it was Pat. And I had seen her and met her at other meetings, and she had come to ask me if it would be a good idea for her to run for the Board of Education. I said, "You want to take my place?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Come on in." And we sat down and we talked. And I have to tell you, in that setting, when she talked about education and her family and her students, and the love she had for all, her care and concern for Scarborough, for education, I realized what a wonderful asset she would be to the Scarborough and for the Scarborough Board of Education. Her positive demeanor, her fresh ideas, I thought this would be a wonderful asset, and I certainly was vindicated in my thoughts. She proved to be all of those things, and I was very pleased to support her, work with her, and have served for the short time that I did. Fortunately for me, that's going to end my opening remarks. Now it falls on some of you to do the rest. I tried in my own way to acknowledge some of the people who are here, and I did not count and call all of the council members and board members, and but I know we're deeply indebted and grateful for all of you for having taken the time to come here. With that, I'd like to call on Town Council Chairman William Kennedy for a Town Council resolution presentation. If you'd like. Sure.
Jack, why don't you come up and we'll present it to you as I read it off. This is Resolution 9913 by the Scarborough Town Council honoring Patricia A. Kachmar. I'm going to read it. Be it resolved by the Council of the Town of Scarborough, Maine, and Town Council assembled that whereas the Town of Scarborough is defined in a large part by the vision, dedication, and civic commitment of its individual citizens, and whereas from time to time the extensive and varied contributions to the Town of Scarborough by a particular individual so outstanding as to warrant special recognition and honor, and whereas the late Patricia A. Kachmar was a remarkable person, possessed of abundant gifts, a strong character, and an extraordinary dedication to serving others, and whereas as a 9-year member of the Scarborough Board of Education, to its chair, Mrs. Kachmar contributed immensely to the nationally recognized advances in the Scarborough schools, and whereas Mrs. Kachmar herself, a lifelong learner, was a teacher who literally transformed the lives of individuals to whom she gave the gift of literacy, and whereas Mrs. Kachmar donated hundreds of hours as a volunteer for the Scarborough schools, various town and school committees, her church, and many other local and regional civic endeavors. And whereas the remarkably positive influence Mrs. Kachmar has had on our schools and community cannot be overstated and will long be remembered in the Scarborough community and beyond. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Scarborough Town Council and Town Council assembled that the Town of Scarborough does hereby recognize and honor the lasting contributions to the Town of Scarborough of the late Patricia A. Kachmar. And it's signed and dated this 15th day of September 1999 by the Scarborough Town Council and the Town Manager. Now I'd like to present that to you, Jack.
Thank you, Bill.
I might also want to add that there were comments certainly at the council meeting in regards to your wife, particularly, and not just your wife. As an example, Charlie Anderson, Councilor Anderson, talked about not just your wife, but your whole family, and tribute to all of you. And I've heard a lot over, particularly the last month, about your wife, and it is an honor to present that to you today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. That's outstanding resolution. I certainly appreciate it, I'm sure. I'd now like to call on the school board chairperson, Deborah Jackson, who would like to read a school board resolution. Deborah?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to present the following. Be it resolved by the Board of Education of the Town of Scarborough, Maine, and the board members heretofore that whereas the Scarborough School Department is dedicated to offering a quality education for all eligible members of the community, and whereas from time to time the extensive and warranted contributions to the Scarborough school community by an individual are so outstanding as to warrant special recognition and honor, and whereas the late Patricia A. Kachmar was a remarkable person, possessed of abundant gifts, a strong character, and an extraordinary dedication to serving others, and whereas a 9-year member of the Scarborough Board of Education, 2 as chair, Mrs. Kachmar contributed immensely to national recognized advances in the Scarborough School Department, and whereas Mrs. Kachmar herself, a lifelong learner, was a teacher who literally transformed the lives of individuals to whom she gave the gift of literacy. And whereas Mrs. Kachmar donated hundreds of hours as a volunteer for the Scarborough School Department, various town and school committees, her church, and many other local and regional civic endeavors. And whereas the remarkable positive influence Mrs. Kachmar had on the Scarborough School Department and its students cannot be overstated and will long be remembered in the community and beyond. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Education and its assembled members that the Board of Education hereby recognizes and honors the lasting contributions of the late Patricia A. Kachmar to the students, citizens, and schools of Scarborough. Signed and dated the 16th day of September by the Scarborough School Board and the Scarborough Superintendent.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Having served on both bodies, it's wonderful to see the thought that was put into both resolutions, and I'm sure the family is deeply appreciative of same. Dr. Charlie Lyons, University of Maine, Fort Kent, was asked to speak and could not, and did send along a fax. And I have difficulty reading faxes, but I'll do my best here. Bear with me. Like many of us, I knew Pat in multiple roles. Her husband Jack and I both grew up in Maine. Her children grew up with my children, and we were both involved in several community activities in Scarborough. I knew Pat most directly, however, as my student at the University of Southern Maine. Throughout her years there, I was pleased and proud to play a role in her development as a teacher. Yet, as I contemplate her life, her years with me at University of Southern Maine were, in fact, a role reversal for us both, since with each seminar or meeting or chance encounter in the hall, Pat always left me feeling as though I had learned something new. She was, in all she did in her life, a teacher, and we all are better for knowing her in life, which was clearly too brief. Sincerely, Charlie M. Lyons, President. That's a wonderful tribute also. Jack, I'll leave this with you, and there'll be the letter, the original letter will be given to you when you arrive.
Thank you.
At this time, there have been a couple of folks who have indicated they would like to make a few remarks, and so at this time I'd like to call on Jackie Perry, member of the Scarborough Board of Education. Jackie.
Good evening. First thing I'd like to do is thank John Thurlow for organizing this and bringing us all together, and he's just a great guy. And you know what he did? The first time I met him, he defeated me in an election. And I went to the next 2 or 3 school board meetings, and the then superintendent would say, "Well, son, now, I don't think you know what." And I finally stood up and I said, "He's not your son. He's a member of this Board of Education, and as a citizen of this town, I expect that you treat him with that respect." And nobody called him son again. And the next year, I decided to run and serve with John. And I did. I was reelected. In fact, I lost 2 or 3 elections in this town and then always came back for more. Pat usually encouraged me. And one of her greatest assets, people tell me I have a great memory and carry a history, but even 3 years ago, I could call her on the phone and say, when did we do that? And by golly, she could tell me. I mean, she had a phenomenal memory. And she carried a history of Scarborough schools and the Scarborough Board in her head. I mean, she also was a pretty good cook. And I want to say that she could not have made the contribution she did without this family. I don't think she ever went grocery shopping, did she, Jack? I mean, you see Jack at the shop and say, you never saw Pat. But there was always room for one more plate at the table. In the years that I served with Pat, in the summertime, I worked at a camp in Sweden, Maine. And I'd come tearing down late Thursday afternoon for a meeting, and I'd stop at Kachmar, and there'd be the plates, boom. You know, there was always food, always a cup of coffee, sometimes a little libation. I never saw her lose her temper. I mean, she may have. She'd say, we'd be sitting there talking, and one of the children, all of them probably asking a question at the same time, and she'd try and answer them, and you'd hear Jack say, they're talking business, leave them alone. And the children would calm down for 5 minutes, and then there'd be more questions. I said to Jimmy tonight, he can't sit in my lap anymore, you know. But he said I could sit in his. So, you know, I've had an association with the family since I was on the board, and I've seen the children grow up, and what a great job Jack and Pat have done with their children. And I think one of the saddest things for me in remembering Pat is her grandchildren won't really know her. And you know, that's kind of sad. They'll know Jack, though. And their children will certainly tell them about their mother and what a great person she was. When we started on the Board of Education, there was a town councilor who was a realtor in this town, and he would always tell prospective families, go someplace else. School system stinks. And that's the truth. That's a true story. And one of Pat's aims for our school system and for herself and for her children was excellence. Let's raise the bar. Let's go one step further. We can do better than what we are doing. She challenged the administration and the teaching staff to do the same thing. We had children in our school system in 1980 who had never seen the ocean. And that's the truth. And she helped to change that. She helped to hire a new superintendent. She helped to hire a new administration. She helped to push through, and I mean it took a lot of work, to have a new language arts program in our town. And she was the standard bearer. And then after the language arts, she went on to math. And then she left the board, I came back on. She'd call me up and she'd beat on me to do this, or she'd beat on me to do that. And I'm sure she did it with other school board members, but she never gave up. She never gave up. She didn't give up on herself. She didn't give up on her family. She didn't give up on her students. She never gave up on our school system. She always strived for that excellence. One more step higher. You can do it. And look at the results in our own children. Look at the results of people here. Your children. We became fast friends. And we were both very busy. I don't know how she did it. I mean, I didn't have children, and I was busy. But she had this high expectation. She pushed for us to be better, all of us. But one of the things that I remember most is that we disagreed. And one of the things that we disagreed about was this. She always felt that learning needed to be age appropriate. And I still believe that learning has nothing to do with age. That you take any child at any time, at any place in their life, and let them learn as much as they want. Let them be a sponge. Now, it's not that she disagreed with that. She just thought that learning should be age appropriate, that there was more to education than what you knew and what you could do. I don't know who was right. Probably we both are in our own way, depending upon who the child happens to be. I miss her. She was my friend, and I miss her.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Yes, we certainly do miss her. And now, representing a longtime friend and colleague, Shirley Hughes, her husband, Herbie Hughes, speak on behalf.
Good evening. I'm going to try to represent my wife the best that I can. However, I probably won't be quite as eloquent as she would be. She asked me if I would present this tonight, and I said I'd be honored to do that. Good evening. I regret that I'm unable to be with you tonight to pay tribute to a very special person who has touched the lives of many. I met Pat in 1971 when our boys were in kindergarten at the Oak Hill Elementary School. In the fall of 1975, we both were elected to the Board of Education, and thus began a friendship that I'll always cherish. Over the years, we shared many ups and downs, and were able to support each other through some rough spots. There were times when it seemed that we could sense when the other needed a shoulder. In the summer of 1976, with much encouragement from Pat, I made the decision to start college. If Pat could do it with a husband and 5 children and all her community activities, then I should be able to do the same with a husband and 2 children. It didn't take long to get caught up in the excitement of learning. Pat finished her bachelor's degree and continued on to complete her master's while I completed my bachelor's. For Pat, this was just one additional learning experience to be followed by many more. As she encouraged others to learn, she also learned from them and continued to look for ways to enable her to better meet the needs of her students, as witnessed by her many success stories with both children and adults. Tonight we focus on Pat's many accomplishments and her dedication to the community she serves so well. I would ask that we take time to say thank you to her family for the time they gave up to share Pat with us. The commitment she made to her students and community was second only to the wonderful family who graciously shared her time with all of us. To the entire Kachmar family, thank you. Finally, thank you, Pat, for all your support and encouragement through the years. During the spring of 1997, while Pat was recuperating at home, I was studying for a certification exam. We had the opportunity to spend time together and to catch up on the latest personal and professional matters. Pat talked about the most recent workshop she had attended, planning ways to use the new information to the best advantage of her students. She talked about how much she enjoyed her time teaching. She spoke of her satisfaction in knowing she had helped someone, especially adults, learned to read, and in knowing that she had made a difference. She talked about her family, the past, the present, and the future, and what a wonderful life she had had, and how much she looked forward to getting back into the classroom to share her new knowledge. As always, she looked for ways to share with others. Over the next couple of months, she continued to give me encouragement to go back to school. My last contact with Pat was to let her know that I had been accepted in the executive MBA program at the University of New Hampshire. I graduated this past June. I thank Pat for being with me during these past 2 years. Once again, her inspiration has been and still is an integral part of my life. I am honored to have the opportunity to pay special tribute to a very special friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herb. Now, a former school board member and town councilor would like to say a few words. Gary Lafano. Gary.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank John for organizing this and bringing us all together tonight. And especially want to thank all of you for being here to honor such a wonderful lady. I came into Pat's life probably on kind of a negative note for Pat, seeing that she was running for re-election and this guy from out of the blue takes out nomination papers and is on the ballot. I think the first time that I really met Pat was kind of at the Marshview restaurant at the candidates night. Jackie was there and Pat was there, and they were all wondering who this guy was all about. Fortunately, Pat and I were both elected to the board. It was a 5-member board then. So back then you really did work very closely together. It was not difficult to be on the same political side of the fence on a Board of Education with Pat Kachmar. She cared, her first thoughts were caring about kids, caring about what was best for the Scarborough school system. And that was pretty easy to follow. Very easy to follow her lead. It was wonderful working with her. She had the dedication that not too many of us have. Share a couple of stories about Pat and the 5 members. I think it was a night early in my school board career. It was in Jackie Perry's kitchen. It was snowing like you couldn't believe. John, myself, Jackie, Shirley Hughes, and Pat were doing phone interviews for a new superintendent. And we didn't give up. There was no way you're going to go home until we finished all those phone interviews. A lot of them were, of course, were out of state, and their weather was fine. I don't really know how or if Pat got home that night. I know that I drove from Jackie's, which is on Black Point Road. I got to Engine 1, and I buried my wife's car in a snowbank, and Dickie Greenleaf come along with a pickup truck, and he took me home. But that was the kind of dedication that Pat had, and as Jackie said, not to give up. We stayed there through that storm because we had a job to do for the Scarborough school system. The other thing I'd like to relate is just a quick little fun story about Pat. I really enjoyed her sense of humor. She had such an infectious laugh, and she not only could laugh at other people, but she could laugh at herself. And I remember the day she came in the evening, she told me this story. She told it with such enthusiasm because it was kind of a dumb thing she did. But she told it with real enthusiasm. She was coming home, needed gas. I'm sure Jack knows this story. So she wheeled into Fielding's when they were selling gas. It was kind of a nice day. She had the window rolled down. She said to the young man, "Fill her up." She's got a crisp $20 bill. And she sits there, and she's kind of thinking about what's going on, and she's thinking, and the young man is pumping the gas. And the $20 bill is now in the door. She says, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? He's still pumping gas. She doesn't have a dime. Nothing on her. That's it. $20 bill, it's in the door. She sits there and says, how do I explain to this young man that my $20 bill's in the door? Well, she did. Because everybody would believe Pat. There no one's going to. She had to come home, I guess. Went back a short time later. They had to tear her car apart to get her $20 out so she could pay her gas. But I think the thing that struck me most about the story was the enthusiasm that Pat had for everything. The enthusiasm for the kids, her family. Everything she did with such enthusiasm. And even though that was kind of a dumb thing, as she said, she told the story with enthusiasm. I had the pleasure of having my sons in scouting at the same time that Jack and Jimmy were there. They were a wonderful family to work with and have my sons be in scouts with. And I truly enjoyed that, and you can see today what fine young men they've become, and of course I did get to know the girls, because I think Jack and Jimmy used to send them out selling Tom Watt, so they could boost their sales so they could go to summer camp. But it was a wonderful experience serving with Pat, and I thank you all for being here and honoring her. And I thank John for inviting me to be a small part of this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. And now the person I hold responsible for this, he's done a lot of work, and he's embarrassed by this and didn't want anything to be said about it, but I got this letter back in January when he began this project, and he's done a lot of work to bring this to fruition, and I for one, am very pleased that he did it, and but now we'll put him on the hot seat. John Thurlow. I'll take a picture of you.
Get that film.
Oh, sure.
Frank's right. I did choose him because he's the oldest. Because I didn't want to do it. Thank you for your nice comments, but thanks also to all the people who helped out here. Deborah, thank you for the resolution. It was wonderful. And Bill, town council. Jackie helped out. Many people did. I wish Shirley could be here because, well, we all know that Shirley and Pat were very, very close. And it was very difficult for her to have to miss this ceremony. But if you don't know, she's moved. She left Herbie here. She moved. And she's got a new job in, remind me, it's Virginia Falls? Falls Church, Virginia. So we congratulate her. She's, I think her comments meant a great deal to me because I have had the same experience. I first met Pat about 20 years ago this fall, in December, because I was that crazy high school kid who wasn't very happy with my high school principal or my experience, so taste for politics, I thought I'd run for the school board. Well, in December, the elections were held in December back then, and only about 500 or 600 people voted. I was related to half of them, so. And Jackie, of course, had just finished that summer. I think we just had a referendum or a tax cap vote or something. I don't know. I was only in high school. And she just had handled this awful budget mess. Can you imagine budget messes in Scarborough? I mean, unheard of. So I did beat her by 8 or 9 votes at that time. But I got a call that night from Pat Kachmar. And she expressed her excitement with my election. And I knew later, maybe I knew then, I don't know, that that election would change things because we had a very effective leader in Jackie, and we still do, by the way. And it was a time in town politics, I guess, where we needed strong leadership on the school committee. We still do. But back then, the Scarborough schools were characterized by many as mediocre at best. That was my motivation for getting involved. And it was my own personal experience that drove me to look toward service that way. But it was Pat's call that welcomed me aboard. And from that point on, Pat was my mentor in every way possible. She, well, back in the time when, you know, high school seniors should be talking to their girlfriends, I was talking to Pat Kachmar on the phone. She trained me, she worked with me, she inspired me. She just didn't welcome me to the school board that night. She really welcomed me into the profession, because the whole experience working with Pat and working with the Scarborough schools really directed my life into the field of education. And it's been 10 years now since I graduated with some inspiration from Pat, and it's been a wonderful thing for me. She was a role model. She inspired me. You know, we all know how much Pat loved children, look how many she had herself. That was always foremost in her mind. Every issue that we debated, children were central to it. And we had to debate everything from facility closings, if you can imagine that, budget problems, facilities, maintenance. She yearned for those conversations about kids and about curriculum and about learning. And I think she succeeded in starting those conversations, because since her time of service, we have seen an incredible, incredible reform in the Scarborough schools. We have been nationally recognized. And I'd like to give a great deal of the credit to Pat's leadership back then. No one person does that, but it takes that inspiration, and Pat clearly provided that. We all know Pat loved learning. And one of the things that I think I take from my relationship with her was that learning is exciting, and you can push yourself, and challenge yourself to continue to do better and better and better. And that's a legacy that I think she left with all of us. I wish I could say these things in the present tense to her. I can only hope that she knows how I felt. And I think the lasting legacy of Pat Kachmar is that we all took from Pat, and we can give what Pat gave to us. And her other legacy is this incredibly wonderful family that she has. And Pat will live on through them too. I feel very privileged to have known her, and I miss her very much as well. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's a wonderful tribute. Thank you.
Now we have former postmaster and school board member Jerry Parody say a few words. Seeing these school board members and counselors here makes me wonder, did we give proper notice of a meeting?
About 40 years ago, two old men were flying from San Francisco to Honolulu. They didn't know each other, and they got involved in a discussion en route. You've done that, probably. This discussion got quite heated, because the problem at hand was how to pronounce the name of the state of Hawaii, or Hawaii. How do you do it? One thought one thing, one thought another. Well, rather than, come to fisticuffs on the aircraft, they decided when they would land, they would look along the railing and find an elderly native and ask him. Fine. They land, and they, just as luck would have it, an old white-haired man standing over there, and they walked over and they gave their problem to him, and they said, "What is the true answer? Is it Hawaii, or is it Hawaii? He says, it's Hawaii. They said, thank you very much. He says, you're welcome. That was not the way Pat Kachmar would have solved that same problem. She would have done the research. And I think it was John who said that Pat felt strongly about being a lifelong learner. If you look in Scripture, you find something about students, too. I think it's in one of the Psalms, Father. And it tells about he who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates on that day and night. And I think as we look at Pat Kachmar, we can see a student who delights. That's a great word. Who delights in learning. Who delights in learning. And that's how she came across to me. I have to confess that when I ran for the school board, it was because I felt there probably were too many people from the teaching profession on it. Now, I'm not sure that I was right, but that was the reason anyway. But it was fun to sit next to Pat, and I did. I think that's the only time I've been on the far right. But I sat on the right there, and Pat and I got along good because I knew the family, because they brought the paper. And I don't mean Jimmy brought the paper, or, although he did sometimes, didn't you, Jim? It was sometimes Jack who brought the paper. And isn't there a lesson there? When you take a job, you have some responsibility to get the job done. Well, anyway, I think it was Pat's idea, perhaps, when we developed a statement of principle, something like that, was it, Jackie? And we wanted everyone to be lifelong learners. Believe me, she was. She was a lifelong learner. And that statement of purpose just fits her. I don't know any other way to say it. As I look back on her life and what I knew of it, and that wasn't as complete as many of you, I see a lady who has a life of 3 parts. One part was the life that she shared with her husband, and she gave that completely. The other was with the small troops around here, the results of that union, and God bless them. And I think the other life was a life spent in learning and then teaching. Yes, learning and then teaching. It was a delightful life, and we are the beneficiaries. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Beautifully spoken, Jerry. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to open it at this time if there are any others here in the audience who would like to make a few comments. If anybody would like to share an anecdote with the family or the friends. Okay. We anticipated that. We didn't put a plant, however, in the audience.
Frank, actually, I would like to.
All right, fine, please.
I'm Pat's youngest daughter, Nancy, and this wasn't planned at all. I actually had a very hard time sitting there listening to all of this because my mom touched my life, as she has many of yours. But what I'd like to share with you, and I don't know who said it, but it really touched a chord in me, where I thought I should stand and share this story with many of you who knew my mom, because it's a story that I wanted to share with my mom. for so many years, for 2 years. I've been working at Unum for nearly 10 years now. And I've worked in a department called long-term care. And I've worked with a lot of people who have needed care from many people as they age. And I heard a story about 1.5 years ago, and of course at that time my mom was no longer with us. And that story, I wrote it down, and it sits in my purse, and I carry it with me because it is a story that reminds me every day, constantly, about my mom. And it goes something like this. It's a very short story, and then I'm going to take my seat back. There was a storm on the Scarborough beaches many years ago. A terrible storm, a terrible rainstorm that washed many, many, many starfish up on shore. And there's a little boy in his house who lived on the shore. And he looked out and he saw all these starfish on the shore. And he ran to his mom and he said, "I'll be right back, I'll be right back." And it was pouring rain, and his mom said, "Where are you going, where are you going?" And he said, "I need my boots, I need my slicker, I need my rain hat." And she said, "You can't go out in this rain, you can't go out in this weather. You're going to get cold, you're going to catch a cold, you can't go outside." And he said, I have to run outside." So without heeding his mother's request, he ran out the door. His hat was flapping, and his jacket wasn't buttoned, and his boots were barely on, he had no socks on. And he ran outside. And literally, in front of him, were hundreds of starfish. And he leaned down, and he picked up a starfish and he threw it back in the water. And he leaned down and he picked up a starfish and he threw it back in the water. And he leaned down and he picked up a starfish and he threw it in the water. Well, coming toward him, he saw an older gentleman, much older, with just a hat on and a jacket. And the man walked toward him and said, "Son, what are you doing?" And he said, "Sir, these starfish need help. They need to get back into the water or they'll die." And the old man said, "Son, there are too many. You can't do that. Don't you worry about them. You go back inside and you don't worry about them. They don't care what you're doing." And he reached down and he picked up a starfish and he looked at that man in the eye and he said, "I reckon this one worries or cares." And he threw it back in the ocean. And that story has stuck with me for nearly 2 years now as I think of my mom, who reckoned that every starfish or every child or every adult that she touched or had an impact in their lives on cared. She cared enough about them to throw them back in the water where they belong. So I thank you for listening and for me being able to share with you my story that I've always wanted to share with my mom.
Thank you very much. Anyone else care to share a few thoughts? Or any thoughts? Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask Jack to come forward, please, and stand here by this plaque. Would like to present it to you, Jack. This plaque will be hung here, placed here in the Media Center, and it reads as follows: "The citizens of the town of Scarborough gratefully acknowledge the extraordinary dedication, leadership, and commitment of Patricia A. Kachmar, exceptional educator, community and church leader, advocate for literacy, member and chairperson, Scarborough Board of Education, 1975 to 1984. Her love for learning inspired every life she touched, and she encouraged us all to be lifelong learners. Dedicated this 28th day of September, 1999. And therefore, it is presented to you, Jack. I would like to ask you at this time if you'd care to make some remarks.
Thank you, Frank. First of all, thank you all for coming. and there have been some wonderful, wonderful tributes to Pat here tonight. And I'll tell you a story about when I met Pat. And I was in the Army and going back from leave from Kennedy to Anchorage, Alaska. And Pat was a flight attendant on Northwest Airlines. And her segment of the flight ended in Seattle. Well, I met Pat somewhere over Chicago. That's as near as close as we could figure it out. But by the time we got to Seattle, and it was the slow jet in those days, she asked me if I would like to go to a party. And I thought, well, I had a time frame to be back. And I said, well, yeah. Where is it? She said, well, it's in Seattle. And it's a birthday party for a one-year-old. Well, that's a different story. So, as it turned out, yes, we did go to the party. And the one-year-old was a girl who had been named after Pat by a friend that she had known for a few years and just thought so much about her. And I tell you that story because that's Pat's story as well. People that she met and knew, and she had a zest for life. And I think all of you, I'm looking here and I'm seeing a flashback for, 35, 40, 50 years in some cases. And all different, situations, walks of life, etc. But I can see her now. She enjoyed every part of her life that she lived, and she lived it all to the fullest. I can see her coming in now from the adult learning center, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and I might have gotten home, and she comes in the door, and she's got a bag in each hand, and she's saying, "I'm so excited." And she always had a story to tell about what had happened or who had done what, and so on and so forth. And this was a continual type thing. But I look around and I see the faces, and I can probably tell a story about each and every one and a flashback here or there. But I want to say this. This is a tribute to Pat, and it's wonderful. But I see a lot of personal stories here. And all of you, in some form, on some time or other, have overcome life's adversities. And I'm going to use Shirley Hughes as an example. She's not here, so I can say this about her. She overcame a serious medical problem to obtain her bachelor's degree in adult life, went on to get her MBA, and her, I think she's director of finance, is that correct? In Falls Church, Virginia, today. And so learning never stops, and I see the teachers and everybody, our neighbors and friends, and so I'll just say this. This is a tribute to Pat, but it's also a tribute to each and every one of you. Thank you.
Fitting as it is, this will conclude this evening's tribute, but I cannot leave without saying, first and foremost, a great big thank you to John Thurlow, who conceived of the idea, and then for all of you who assisted him. And there were some, and he told me there were those who helped him in putting this together, and certainly the elected officials, and each and every one of you who took the time out of your very busy schedules to be here this evening and to share this tribute to a woman, as has been said, and none can say it better than Jack, I'm sure, when she's full of life. And she was a wonderful lady. She touched us all, and we hope that the students who come into this media center and see this plaque will look at it and ask, this must have been a great lady. Who was she? Tell us about her. And her legacy will live on through the people who remembered her and who knew her and who were fortunate enough to have crossed her path at some point and touched her in some way as she touches us all here now. Thank you all, and good evening.
Thank you.